So here's another lecture on kinetics for Gen Chem 2 at BBC. We're going to be talking about reaction mechanisms. So in addition to knowing the rate of a chemical reaction, kinetics deals with understanding a sequence of events that's occurring during a chemical reaction. In other words, the steps that describe a pathway from the reactants to the products. And this pathway is known as a reaction mechanism. We're trying to answer the question, what's actually happening? So how are the molecules getting from the reactant state to the product state? Sometimes the reactions proceed directly, and other times they actually involve a number of steps. And these steps can involve something called an intermediate, and they're not clearly defined in the balanced chemical equation that we're used to looking at. So let's just go over some vocabulary. We have the term elementary reaction, which describes an individual molecular event. You can think of it as a single step in the overall reaction mechanism. The overall reaction describes the balanced chemical equation, or is reflected in the balanced chemical equation. It's the reaction stoichiometry. So what you've been looking at so far in Chem 201 and any other chem classes you've had is an overall reaction. A reaction intermediate is formed in one step and consumed in a subsequent step. This means your intermediate does not show up in the overall reaction. So it's some form of a molecule or a coupling of two molecules that is only there for sort of a fleeting moment and is a stepping stone to the products. We have this term molecularity, which refers to the number of reactants involved in a given step. So it's sort of like, okay, how many different molecules do we need for this step to happen? So not all molecules are always involved in every step of a chemical reaction. And we have these terms unimolecular, bimolecular, and intermolecular that refer to that the molecularity. So if it's one molecule, its molecularity, or if the step requires just the one molecule, like for a decomposition, its molecularity would be unimolecular. Whereas if two molecules need to collide, and then it would be bimolecular, and three would be termolecular, and that's the highest we go. I have never seen any reactions that were more complicated than that. I'm sure there are, I just haven't seen them. They're uncommon. So here we're looking at a two-step mechanism. So down here is the overall reaction, and this is what we would have shown you in the past, and this is what we've kind of used to do calculations, and sort of the thing is, perhaps in this reaction we'd be interested in the fact that this reaction produces carbon dioxide, right? And we want to, so far we've asked, well, how much carbon dioxide does it produce? So how fast does it produce the carbon dioxide? Now we begin to ask how does it make this carbon dioxide? Like how does NO2 and CO get from that state to a state of NO and CO2? So what's really interesting in this particular example is that we have this intermediate, which is NO3. So in this first step, what's happening is a molecule of what's happening is two molecules of NO2 have to collide first, and that is not at all reflected in this stoichiometry. Two molecules of NO2 will collide with each other. And in so doing, an oxygen atom gets basically knocked from one to the other. So one of these oxygen atoms, let's say it's this one right here, right? Now gets attached to the nitrogen. So you see it went from being on, gets attached to the other nitrogen. It went from being on this nitrogen to being on this nitrogen, right? So just in the process of the collision, the oxygen atom bounces over. Now what happens is that NO3 intermediate can collide with a molecule of CO, and we get an exchange. Then the oxygen jumps from the NO3 to the CO. We return the NO2, and now we have a CO2. So oxygen is transferred basically by this intermediate NO3, and NO3 sort of like is acting like a carrier. It's like the delivery person right here. Let me take this oxygen from you, and I'll go over here and give it to the CO. So this is what we mean by a mechanism. And each of these steps is an elementary reaction. We've basically broken it down to the simplest form, like only one thing is happening. In this step, The only thing that's happening is oxygen's getting moved from an NO2 to an NO2, from one NO2 to another. And because it's an elementary step, we can write the rate of this part of the reaction as a bimolecular or second order, because now we can go with the stoichiometry of the reaction. So in this case, this step is represented as 2NO2, arrow, 1NO, 1NO3. And now we can use the coefficient of the reactants as the order. So the order and the molecularity for an elementary step are the same. And here you have the second step, NO3 plus CO, and in this case it's also second order, but it's first order in NO3 and first order in CO. And now you can begin to understand why an overall reaction's order can be more complicated than what it looks like, right? Why a decomposition reaction could possibly be a second order reaction, because there's stuff going on behind the scenes, right? It may need to collide with two other of itself in order to go through a transition state, go through its process and achieve its final state. Okay, so I'm just going to end that video there, because that is a little bit of a bookend for reaction mechanisms.